Alright, so I'm dropping this video a little bit in advance because Himiko should be coming out in the next few days to the NA version of the game. And this is one of those servers that I've been gassing up ever since they've been announced on the JP version of the game. That's because Himiko fills the role of like a secondary buster support slash buster DPS servant. She is kind of like Merlin mixed with Super Orion. She's a little nutty. And alongside Van Gogh represents like really broken supports that are like kind of overlooked in FGO. So we're going to talk about her in today's video, hopefully putting this out a little bit before she comes out. So you have a little bit of time to be like, okay, this is what she does. This is how good she is. Do I want to spend St. Cores for her? But let's be honest, if you're going for the waifu potential, you probably already are decided as to whether or not you're going to be summoning for this servant. Before we begin though, if you have not already, make sure you leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for that sweet FGO daily content. And if you're like, man, I want more ZTL, how can I get more ZTL content? Well, I stream every weekday over on my Twitch. That is linked down in the description down below. I'm trying to start around 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, hey, even if you don't get the notification, you know when your boy's going to be going live. With all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into this servant, starting off with her hits. Now, Himiko's a bit of an odd servant. She's a support, but also a DPS, so they couldn't give her a triple arts deck because she needs to have those double buster cards so she can bust her Brave Chain with her own NP. But she's got to have the double arts cards to, well, get to that NP so she can actually be an effective support. And so I think the way they went about this is like the most balanced way they could have done it. They gave her a pretty solid quick card with 4 hits on it, 9.9% star generation. In a Brave Chain, she could drop a fair amount of stars, especially with that extra attack because, I mean, do I even gotta say it? If you know, you already know. But more importantly, she's got very decent arts cards. She's got double arts with 3 hits apiece, 0.57% NP gain per attack, but her passives actually give her a 10% buff to her arts cards performance, meaning these arts cards are a little better than they may appear off rip. And because Himiko, spoiler alert, is a crit support type servant, she should be critting on these arts cards pretty frequently. And so even though the natural NP gain is a little bit low, the hits should make up for it, plus the passive 10% should also put her at a point where she's genning her NP effectively. But if that's not enough for you, Himiko does have something in the back pocket to help her NP gain. Also, while we're talking about her passive skills, Himiko is a very tanky servant in general. Not only is she a ruler, meaning she takes resisted damage from all of the main classes of servants, but she has a passive that makes her immune to poison and curses entirely. Meaning your Himiko will not get worn down by like these small debuffs that take a little bit of her HP every single turn. And really the only stuff that can get her are things like the Tomoe fight from Shamo, so that's something that everybody should be familiar with. A fight that kind of slowly grades you down with passive damage over time. The only thing that can really get Himiko is going to be that passive burn damage, because in general she's going to be immune to that poison and curse debuff. I say in general because JP recently introduced like this advanced quest that it's like it gives you a debuff, but it's not poison or curse. They kind of gave it a new name so it applies differently, but aside from that, any weird nonsense that JP is doing, she's gonna be very tanky, and I thought it was very worth bringing up. Now let's dive into some of her skills, because Himiko's skills are all really insane. Starting off with the first skill, this might not seem very insane to many people, but it's broken. It's a 20% attack buff to the entire party for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown that also grants the entire party 8-star regeneration for 3 turns on the same 5-turn cooldown. The reason this is broken is that at face value, that's 8 times 3, that's 24 stars a turn. But let's not forget, you can have 2 Himikos. And the amount of stars you're going to be refunding every turn literally is almost 50. The fact that you can have 24 from one, but you have double Himiko, and that's 48 stars a turn, plus the 40% to the entire party, is nutty broken. You're pretty much saying, yeah, I guarantee that I'm going to be critting on all of my cards, basically, for the next 3 turns. That, in and of itself, is stupid broken. Plus, again, double Himiko, you're getting 40% attack to the entire party. You have no need to even bring like a Merlin at that point. Just buff another one of your Buster party members, because, spoiler alert, she kind of facilitates Buster gameplay. But I mean, you can bring her to really any crit party whatsoever. Anyone that wants to do crits, double Himiko or even just splashing a Himiko in there is absolutely insane. With double Himiko, you get a very strong amount of damage. Even with one, you get 24 stars every single turn and a solid attack buff that's going to multiply into your card, NP damage, and special damage mods. It just makes her really good off rip, and this is just the first skill. The second skill is where Himiko's like, yeah, I know that I'm helping other people do damage, but what if I was also the DPS? Basically saying, I know Koyenskaya is coming out in a year, but you know what, Koyenskaya, hold my beer for a second. I'm going to be the crit DPS. And she starts it off really strong by giving herself a 30% Buster buff, a 50% special damage mod against demonic enemies. Both of those, by the way, are 3-turn buffs on a 6-turn cooldown. And then she's like, oh yeah, by the way, if I wasn't tanky enough with my immunity to poison and curse and my ruler status, I also give myself invincibility for 1 turn. Keeping in mind that by the time that Himiko actually releases to the NA version of the game, Merlin is going to be your primary Buster buffer, and well, he has a pretty good second skill if you aren't aware, that kind of gives the entire party invincibility for the turn. So she's like, you know what, I'm already thick enough, and my boy Merlin over here is going to protect me for a turn, but what if I had extra survivability on top of all of that nonsense? Overall, it's dramatically buffing her damage because, if you guys remember, I just said that the attack buff is going to multiply into her other buffs. Himiko is giving herself 3 of the 4 main buff types. Now, she doesn't need an NP damage buff because her NP doesn't do any damage, so effectively, she's giving her the 3 main damage types that she actually needs. Damage mod, card buff, and attack buff. And demonic, it's baffling how much we talk about demonic nowadays, but it is an insanely good special damage mod. The servants are a little bit limited, and you might be like, well, that's not a whole lot of servants, but look at the enemies. This isn't even all of the enemies you could be fighting that have the demonic tag, but a lot of these guys that are being shown on screen, or were shown on screen a couple of seconds ago, are very, very common. Skeletons, werewolves, lamias, the boars, the ghosts, they're all very common. You'll encounter at least 1 wave of these people in some event or some Lost Belt story chapter. And so it makes it an insanely good special damage mod. And again, we're only on the 2nd skill. She still has a 3rd skill and an NP to go. Her 3rd skill is a 50% battery. Yeah, remember when I was talking about NP gain and how, like, oh, she might have some struggles if you're not critting enough and blah, 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 blah. Nah, 50% battery. She can just juice herself to her NP if she wants to. Oh, and by the way, it also gives her a pretty decent star weight to her Buster cards and 100% Buster crit damage for that turn on a 6-turn cooldown. So, yeah, you know that crit buff that Merlin gives, or that crit buff that Scotty gives? She gives that to herself. Basically meaning she's going to Tim Tam slam people into the ground with her Buster crits. And it's just like, overall, not only is she giving a lot of utility to the party with the attack buff, the fact that she gens stars every turn, but she's self-sufficient. She gives herself a card buff plus a really good damage mod. She has a battery for her own NP generation, and her crits are going to absolutely slap the opponent into the ground. But as you guys may know, this isn't the strength of a support type servant. A lot of the strongest stuff comes from their NP. I mean, Merlin's got one of the best NPs in the game. Castoria's got one of the best NPs in the game. Supports and having good NPs are some of the best combos known to mankind. And so, Himiko's NP is similarly very, very broken. In fact, this is what kicks off the Buster meta's ability to lean into overcharge. You might have heard me like kind of mention this with Morgan and Himiko, but they both have this effect on their NP that they buff the party's overcharge NP, but Himiko does it to a pretty drastic degree. So yeah, depending on her NP level, she does give you a 30 to 50% Buster buff for 3 turns. That in and of itself is insane, because if you actually wail for Himiko, it's the same effect that basically Castoria has. Castoria has the same thing, but it's an attack buff. It makes her kind of worth going for higher NP copies because you can do more damage over time. And yes, her overcharge gives you a 50 to 100% crit damage buff for 3 turns. Again, if you're stacking her NP, you're stacking Buster and crit damage, and things get out of control very quickly. But the overcharge effect that she gives overcharges the entire party's NP stage by 2 for 1 instance for 3 turns, meaning as soon as they fire their NP, they get that free overcharge. And if they don't fire it that turn, it's okay, it's there for 3 turns. And there are literally too many Buster servants to name that have good overcharge effects, from just getting damage to debuffing the enemy, for why this is a good effect. This is stupid broken, especially when you're going into like Morgan team comps where like both characters are leaning into it, or you have, God forbid, double Himiko. This can get very broken and extremely out of hand very quickly. And it's why Himiko is one of those servants that when she came out, I was like, she's pretty good, but over time is becoming better and better and better. And I think that's the reason people on NA are so hyped about her, because when we got her on JP, we didn't know what we had. We didn't know she was this nutty. But as like more and more servants came out, Himiko just got better and better. She's one of those servants that is still a little underrated to this day, and I'm hoping that I came into this video with the energy and the gas to show you guys that this is a servant worth being hyped over. I don't want to play around with this video because I'm like, Himiko is legitimately extremely good. So is Van Gogh. When Van Gogh comes out, you better expect me to be gassed up in that video, because both of these girls are extremely broken and are definitely worth summoning for. The only problem is that there's a lot of hype servants in the near future. While Himiko is extremely good, you have to balance, do you want to summon for Himiko over Van Gogh? A Buster crit support versus a quick crit support. Then there's also Muramasa, a very good fan favorite character. Morgan, who I myself am going to go ballistic over when she comes out. Melusine, one of the best, if not the best, arts DPS servant in the game. You have Barghest. You have Sith is coming out. Percival is even some people's favorite character. Like, you have a lot of very hyped servants coming out. Space Ishtar gets a rerun at the beginning of next year, so it kind of makes you have to balance your Saint Chords and decide if you want to summon on Himiko, as broken as she is. But I feel like I've made my case in this video. In this review for Himiko, I feel like I've demonstrated that she is extremely broken, she's really good, she brings a lot of value to your Chaldea, but it's up to you to decide if she is worth summoning over all these other servants. I didn't even mention like Ibuki and Doman who are coming out. There are a lot of good servants coming out in the future, so just look at your account and discern for yourself if you're going to be summoning for Himiko. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.